The morning sun cast long shadows across the naval base in Virginia Beach as Lieutenant Sarah Chun adjusted her tactical gear one final time. At 28, she had already earned a reputation that preceded her wherever she went in military circles. The other personnel called her Falcon behind her back, though few knew the real reason why. Some assumed it was because of her sharp eyes that seemed to catch every detail others missed. Others thought it came from her ability to strike fast and disappear before anyone knew what hit them. The truth was simpler and more personal. Sarah had grown up on her grandmother's ranch in Montana, where she spent countless hours training rescued birds of prey for release back into the wild. She learned patience from watching eagles soar for hours without moving a muscle. She discovered precision from observing how a hawk could dive from incredible heights and catch prey with deadly accuracy. Most importantly, she understood survival from seeing how these magnificent creatures adapted to any environment and overcame seemingly impossible challenges. When Sarah joined the Navy 8 years ago, she brought these lessons with her. Her instructors quickly noticed something different about her approach to training. While other recruits rushed through exercises trying to prove their strength, Sarah moved with calculated efficiency. She watched, learned, and then executed with a precision that left even veteran trainers impressed. During survival training in the desert, she found water sources that others walked past. In combat simulations, she positioned herself in ways that gave her maximum advantage while remaining nearly invisible to opposing forces. The nickname started during her second year of service. During a particularly challenging training exercise in the Philippines, Sarah's unit found themselves trapped in dense jungle with limited supplies and hostile forces closing in from multiple directions. While her teammates debated loud strategies that would have given away their position, Sarah climbed silently into the canopy above. From her elevated position, she spent 3 hours observing enemy patrol patterns, noting weak points in their formation, and identifying the perfect moment to strike. When she finally made her move, it was swift and devastating. She disabled the communications equipment of the lead patrol, created diversions that scattered the remaining forces, and opened an escape route for her entire unit. The whole operation took less than 20 minutes, and by the time the enemy realized what had happened, Sarah and her team were miles away. That night, as they made camp in a secure location, her squad leader looked at her with a mixture of respect and amazement. "You know what you remind me of?" he said, cleaning his rifle by the dim light of their shielded fire. "My grandfather used to tell stories about hunting with falcons back in the old country. He said they were the perfect hunters because they combined patience, intelligence, and deadly speed. They could see everything from above, plan their attack perfectly, and strike when their prey least expected it." From that moment, the name stuck. Sarah never encouraged it, but she never discouraged it either. She understood that respect in the military was earned through actions, not words, and her actions consistently spoke louder than anything she could have said. As her reputation grew, so did the complexity of her assignments. Sarah found herself being called in for missions that required her unique skill set. When a drug cartel in South America had taken hostages in a compound that seemed impossible to penetrate, Sarah spent 2 days studying their routines from a distance before executing a rescue operation that freed all 6 hostages without a single shot being fired. When pirates in the Horn of Africa were using a network of hidden bases to coordinate attacks on shipping lanes, Sarah infiltrated their communication system and provided intelligence that led to the capture of the entire organization. Each success brought new challenges and higher stakes. Sarah thrived in this environment because she understood something that many of her peers missed. Modern warfare wasn't just about superior firepower or advanced technology. It was about understanding human nature, reading situations correctly, and adapting to rapidly changing circumstances. These were lessons she had learned from watching predators in the wild, and they served her well in the complex world of military operations. 3 years ago, Sarah's exceptional record caught the attention of a joint task force that operated in the shadows between different branches of the military. This group handled situations that were too sensitive for conventional forces and too complex for standard special operations units. They needed someone who could work independently, think creatively under pressure, and execute missions with minimal support. Sarah's name kept appearing in their discussions until finally, they decided to bring her in for evaluation. The testing process was unlike anything Sarah had experienced before. Instead of physical challenges or weapons proficiency tests, she was presented with complex scenarios that had no clear solutions. She was given incomplete information and asked to make critical decisions. She was placed in situations where traditional military doctrine would fail and asked to find alternative approaches. Through it all, the evaluators watched not just what she did, but how she thought through problems. Sarah approached each challenge the same way she had learned to train birds of prey. She observed carefully, looking for patterns and weaknesses that others might miss. She remained patient when the natural instinct was to act quickly. She adapted her strategy based on changing conditions rather than stubbornly sticking to original plans. Most importantly, she understood that sometimes the best action was no action at all, waiting for the perfect moment when success was virtually guaranteed. The evaluation process took 6 months, during which Sarah continued her regular duties while being secretly tested in real-world situations. She was assigned to missions where unknown observers monitored her performance. She was given intelligence that was deliberately incomplete to see how she would fill in the gaps. She was placed in command of teams that included members who were actually evaluators in disguise. Through it all, she performed exactly as her reputation suggested she would. When the evaluation was complete, Sarah was called to a meeting in a nondescript office building in Washington, D.C. The room contained 4 people whose names she was never told and whose faces she was instructed to forget. They offered her a position that would officially keep her rank and assignments within the Navy, but would unofficially make her available for operations that existed outside normal command structures. Sarah accepted without hesitation. She understood that this opportunity would allow her to use her skills in ways that could make a real difference. The work would be dangerous, often without backup or support. The missions would be complex, with success or failure potentially affecting international relations. Most importantly, the nature of the work meant that recognition would be minimal and public acknowledgement would be impossible. The next 2 years were a blur of assignments across 6 continents. Sarah found herself in situations that tested every skill she had developed and forced her to develop new ones. She disrupted human trafficking networks in Eastern Europe by infiltrating their operations and providing intelligence that led to simultaneous raids across multiple countries. She prevented a terrorist attack in Southeast Asia by identifying and neutralizing the threat before local authorities even knew it existed. She recovered stolen military technology from arms dealers in the Middle East through an operation so subtle that the thieves never realized their merchandise was missing until weeks after Sarah had already delivered it to friendly forces. Each mission reinforced Sarah's reputation and expanded her capabilities. She learned to speak 4 languages fluently and developed working knowledge of 3 others. She mastered technologies that most military personnel would never encounter. She built a network of contacts in intelligence agencies, law enforcement organizations, and even criminal enterprises that proved invaluable for gathering information and executing complex operations. But success came with a price. The nature of her work meant that Sarah lived in a world of constant vigilance and careful calculation. She could never fully relax, never completely trust anyone, and never be certain that today's ally wouldn't become tomorrow's enemy. The isolation was profound, even when surrounded by teammates and colleagues. Few people understood the psychological demands of her work, and fewer still could relate to the experiences that shaped her daily reality. It was during this period that Sarah first heard rumors about a group of Navy SEALs who were developing a reputation for taking on missions that other special operations units considered too risky or too complex. This particular team, led by a veteran named Commander Jake Morrison, had successfully completed operations in hostile territory that conventional wisdom said were impossible. They were being compared to legendary special forces units from previous generations, and their success rate was generating attention from the highest levels of military command. Sarah was intrigued but not surprised. She had learned that in the world of elite military operations, there were always individuals and units that pushed beyond established limits. What caught her attention was not their success, but reports about their methods. According to sources within the special operations community, this SEAL team relied heavily on superior technology, overwhelming firepower, and rapid execution. They were masters of direct action, capable of neutralizing threats with speed and precision that left enemies no time to respond. This approach was the opposite of Sarah's methodology, which emphasized observation, patience, and subtle manipulation of circumstances to achieve objectives with minimal direct confrontation. She wondered how such different philosophies would work together, and whether there might be opportunities for collaboration that could benefit both approaches. The answer to her curiosity came sooner than expected. 2 months after she first heard about Commander Morrison's team, Sarah received orders for an assignment that would change everything. The mission briefing was more detailed than usual, suggesting higher stakes and greater complexity than her typical operations. More importantly, the briefing indicated that she would be working alongside other special operations personnel to achieve objectives that required multiple skill sets and coordinated effort. As Sarah read through the classified documents that outlined her new assignment, she realized that this mission would test not only her individual abilities, but also her capacity to work with others who might not understand or appreciate her methods. The operation would take place in hostile territory with limited support and significant risk of international complications if anything went wrong. Success would require perfect coordination between team members who had never worked together before. The briefing also revealed that she would be working with the very SEAL team she had heard so much about. Commander Morrison and his men had been assigned to handle the direct action components of the mission, while Sarah's role would involve intelligence gathering, surveillance, and what the documents diplomatically referred to as alternative problem-solving approaches. Reading between the lines, Sarah understood that she was being brought in because conventional methods might not be sufficient for this particular challenge. 3 days later, Sarah found herself on a transport plane heading toward a forward operating base in a region she had never visited before. The flight gave her time to study the mission files more carefully and to begin formulating preliminary strategies for the challenges ahead. As always, she started by trying to understand the environment where she would be operating, the people she would be working with, and the objectives she was expected to achieve. The mission target was a compound in mountainous terrain that served as headquarters for an organization trafficking both weapons and people across international borders. Intelligence indicated that the facility was heavily fortified and defended by personnel with military training and experience. Previous attempts to gather information about the operation had failed, with 2 reconnaissance teams losing contact and being presumed captured or killed. The stakes were higher than usual because recent intelligence suggested that the trafficking organization was planning to sell advanced military technology to groups that posed direct threats to American interests. The window for preventing this transaction was closing rapidly, and conventional approaches had already proven ineffective. This was exactly the type of situation that required creative solutions and unconventional methods. As the plane began its descent toward the forward operating base, Sarah reviewed what she knew about the SEAL team she would be working with. Commander Morrison had an impressive record of successful operations, but his methods were typically direct and overwhelming. His team excelled at situations where the objective was to neutralize threats quickly and decisively. They were masters of night operations, close-quarters combat, and tactical coordination. Sarah respected their abilities, but she also recognized that their approach might not be optimal for this particular mission. The target compound was located in territory where any direct military action could create diplomatic complications. The trafficking organization had connections to local governments and international criminal networks that made them sensitive to outside interference. Most importantly, the intelligence value of the operation might be lost if the assault was too aggressive or too obvious. These considerations suggested that success would require a more subtle approach, at least initially. Sarah began developing plans that would allow her to gather intelligence and identify weaknesses before any direct action became necessary. She hoped that Commander Morrison would be receptive to strategies that prioritized information gathering over immediate assault, but she was prepared for the possibility that their philosophies might conflict. The plane touched down just as the sun was setting, casting the remote base in the golden light that reminded Sarah of evenings on her grandmother's ranch. As she gathered her gear and prepared to meet the team that would determine the success or failure of her most challenging mission yet, Sarah felt the familiar calm that came before important operations. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them with the patience, precision, and adaptability that had earned her the name Falcon. The briefing room at the forward operating base smelled of stale coffee and tension when Sarah walked in at 0600 hours the next morning. 4 men in tactical gear looked up as she entered, their expressions ranging from curious to skeptical. She had expected this reaction. Special operations units, especially elite teams like Navy SEALs, often viewed outsiders with suspicion until they proved themselves capable of meeting the team's standards. Commander Jake Morrison stood at the front of the room, studying satellite images projected on a large screen. At 35, he had the lean build and alert posture of someone who had spent 15 years in combat zones. His reputation was built on decisive action and successful outcomes, but Sarah could see in his eyes the careful assessment of a leader who understood that this mission would be different from his usual operations. "Lieutenant Chun," Morrison said without looking away from the screen, "I've heard interesting things about your work. Some people call you unconventional. Others use different terms." His tone was neutral, but Sarah caught the underlying challenge in his words. "I prefer to think of it as adaptable, sir," Sarah replied, taking a seat at the conference table. "Every situation requires its own solution." Morrison finally turned to face her, and Sarah could see him evaluating her in the same way she had learned to assess new environments. "This situation," he said, gesturing toward the satellite images, "requires us to infiltrate a compound that has successfully resisted every attempt at reconnaissance for the past 8 months. The facility is built into a mountainside with only one apparent access route. It's defended by at least 30 personnel with military training, and our intelligence suggests they have access to advanced surveillance technology." Sarah studied the images while Morrison continued his briefing. The compound was impressive from a defensive standpoint, positioned to take advantage of natural terrain features that made direct assault extremely difficult. The single road leading to the facility was exposed for more than 2 miles, making any vehicle approach suicide. The building itself was constructed to blend with the surrounding rock formations, which would make airstrikes nearly impossible without extensive collateral damage. But Sarah also noticed details that Morrison and his team had apparently missed. The satellite images showed patterns in the vegetation around the compound that suggested underground water sources. The positioning of certain structures indicated prevailing wind directions that could be used to advantage. Most importantly, the defensive preparations seemed focused on preventing direct assault rather than detecting subtle infiltration. "What's our timeline?" Sarah asked, still studying the images. 72 hours, Morrison replied. "Intelligence indicates the technology transfer will occur during a meeting scheduled for this weekend. If we miss this window, the weapons could disappear into networks we can't track." Sarah nodded, understanding the urgency while also recognizing the limitations it imposed. 72 hours was barely enough time for proper reconnaissance, let alone developing and executing a comprehensive plan. This constraint would force them to rely on incomplete information and adapt quickly to changing circumstances. "What assets do we have available?" she asked. Morrison's team leader, Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, answered from across the table. "Full tactical gear, night vision, communication equipment, explosive charges, and enough firepower to level the compound if necessary." His tone suggested confidence in the direct approach that had served the team well in previous operations. Sarah could see that Rodriguez and the other team members expected this mission to follow their usual pattern: gather basic intelligence, plan a coordinated assault, execute with overwhelming force, and extract before enemy reinforcements could arrive. It was an effective strategy that had earned them their reputation, but Sarah suspected it would not be optimal for this particular situation. "What about transportation?" Sarah asked. "How do we get close enough to the target without being detected?" Morrison pointed to a map showing the region around the compound. "There's a village about 15 miles away where we can establish a base of operations. From there, we'll have to move on foot through mountain terrain to reach the observation positions we've identified." Sarah studied the map more carefully, noting elevation changes, vegetation patterns, and potential shelter locations. The approach Morrison had outlined would work for a traditional reconnaissance and assault operation, but it would also expose the team to detection by anyone monitoring the approaches to the compound. "Sir," Sarah said carefully, "I'd like to suggest an alternative approach that might give us better intelligence and more options for achieving our objectives." The room fell silent. Sarah could sense the tension increasing as Morrison and his team realized she was challenging their established methods. She knew this moment was critical for establishing her credibility and determining whether the two different approaches could work together effectively. Morrison crossed his arms and leaned back against the wall. "I'm listening." Sarah moved to the map and began pointing out features that supported her alternative strategy. The compound is positioned to defend against direct assault, but the defensive preparations create blind spots that could be exploited for infiltration. Instead of establishing an observation post at a distance, I propose getting much closer to gather detailed intelligence before any direct action. Rodriguez shook his head immediately. "Too risky. If you're detected that close to the target, you'll compromise the entire operation." "Only if I'm detected," Sarah replied. "But the risk of detection can be minimized by using approaches and methods that take advantage of the enemy's assumptions about how we operate." She traced a route on the map that followed natural terrain features and avoided the obvious approach routes. This path uses a creek bed that runs within 300 meters of the compound. Satellite imagery shows dense vegetation along the water course, and the elevation changes would provide concealment from most observation points. Morrison studied the route Sarah had indicated, and she could see him evaluating the tactical implications. "Even if you could get that close without being detected," he said, "what could you accomplish that we can't achieve with our planned approach?" Sarah had anticipated this question. Close observation would allow us to determine actual guard rotations, identify weak points in their security procedures, and possibly discover additional entrances that aren't visible in satellite images. More importantly, it would give us real-time intelligence about the layout of the facility and the location of high-value targets. The other team members exchanged glances that Sarah could easily interpret. They were skeptical about her ability to accomplish what she was proposing, and they were concerned about deviating from proven methods for an approach that seemed unnecessarily complex and risky. Staff Sergeant Thomas Mitchell, the team's communications specialist, voiced what the others were thinking. "With respect, Lieutenant, our standard approach has worked successfully on dozens of operations. Why complicate things with experimental tactics when we have methods we know will work?" Sarah understood their concern, but she also knew that this mission required capabilities beyond those needed for standard special operations. "Because the standard approach has already been tried here," she replied. "Two previous reconnaissance teams have been lost attempting conventional approaches to this target. If we use the same methods that have failed before, we're likely to get the same results." Morrison was quiet for several minutes, studying the map and satellite images while considering Sarah's proposal. Finally, he looked up and addressed his team. "Rodriguez, Mitchell, prepare gear for the standard approach. We'll establish overwatch positions and be ready to execute direct assault if necessary. Chun, you'll have 12 hours to gather intelligence using your method. If you can provide actionable information that improves our chances of success, we'll incorporate it into our plan." Sarah nodded, understanding that Morrison was giving her an opportunity to prove herself while maintaining the ability to fall back on proven methods if her approach failed. It was a reasonable compromise that demonstrated good leadership, even though it meant she would be operating with limited time and no backup. The next 6 hours were spent in preparation. Sarah studied every detail of the satellite imagery and topographical maps, memorizing terrain features, and planning her approach route with obsessive precision. She selected equipment that prioritized stealth and observation over firepower, choosing night vision gear, cameras with telephoto lenses, and communication devices that could transmit data without revealing her position. Meanwhile, Morrison's team prepared for their conventional approach. They established communication protocols, planned assault routes, and positioned equipment that would allow them to respond quickly if Sarah's reconnaissance revealed opportunities for direct action. As the sun set behind the mountains, Sarah made her final preparations. She had changed into clothing that would blend with the natural environment and applied camouflage paint that would make her nearly invisible in low-light conditions. Her equipment was configured to minimize noise and eliminate any reflective surfaces that might give away her position. Morrison approached her as she completed her gear check. "Chun, I want to be clear about something. If you get into trouble out there, we may not be able to extract you without compromising the entire mission. You'll be operating beyond the range where we can provide immediate support." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Understood, sir. I've operated alone in hostile territory before. If something goes wrong, I'll find a way to deal with it without exposing the team." Morrison nodded, but Sarah could see the concern in his eyes. She realized that despite his reputation for hard-nosed leadership, he genuinely cared about the welfare of anyone under his command, even someone he had known for less than 24 hours. "One more thing," Morrison said. "Your approach is different from anything my team has experience with. Help me understand what you're really trying to accomplish out there." Sarah considered how to explain her methodology in terms that would make sense to someone trained in direct action tactics. "Sir, when birds of prey hunt, they don't rely on strength or speed alone. They study their target, learn its patterns and weaknesses, and then strike at exactly the right moment with exactly the right amount of force. The key is understanding the situation completely before taking any action." Morrison was quiet for a moment, processing this explanation. "And you think that approach will work better than overwhelming force?" "I think it will give us more options," Sarah replied. "If we understand the situation completely, we can choose the approach that has the best chance of success with the lowest risk of complications." At 2,100 hours, Sarah began her movement toward the target compound. The night was moonless and cloudy, providing excellent concealment, but making navigation more challenging. She moved slowly and carefully, using terrain features to mask her approach, and stopping frequently to listen for sounds that might indicate enemy patrols or surveillance. The route she had planned took her through dense forest for the first several miles, then along a rocky ridge that provided good concealment while allowing her to monitor the approaches to the compound. By midnight, she had reached the creek bed that would take her to within observation range of her target. The water was cold and moved swiftly enough to mask small sounds, but Sarah still moved with extreme caution. The vegetation along the banks provided excellent concealment, but it also limited her ability to see potential threats. She relied on her hearing and intuition, skills developed through years of training and experience in similar environments. At 0200 hours, Sarah reached a position approximately 300 meters from the compound's main entrance. Through her night vision scope, she could see details that had been invisible in the satellite imagery. Guard positions were more sophisticated than intelligence had suggested, with overlapping fields of fire that would make direct assault extremely costly. More importantly, she could see patterns in the guards' behavior that indicated weak points in their security procedures. For the next 4 hours, Sarah maintained her position and gathered intelligence. She photographed defensive positions, documented guard rotations, and identified structural features that could be exploited for infiltration. She also discovered something that would change the entire nature of the mission: a service tunnel that connected the compound to a water treatment facility located 500 meters away in a different valley. The tunnel was not visible in satellite imagery because it was completely underground, but Sarah could see where it entered the compound and where personnel occasionally emerged from what appeared to be a maintenance shed. This discovery opened possibilities for infiltration that would avoid the heavily defended main approaches entirely. As dawn approached, Sarah began her withdrawal to the rendezvous point where Morrison's team was waiting. She moved even more carefully during daylight hours, when any movement might be spotted by sentries or surveillance cameras. The return journey took 3 hours, but she reached the designated meeting point without incident. Morrison and his team were waiting with expressions of barely controlled impatience. Sarah could see that they were eager to hear what she had discovered and whether her reconnaissance had provided information that would justify the risk she had taken. "Report," Morrison said simply. Sarah spread out detailed photographs and diagrams she had prepared during her observation period. "Sir, the compound is more heavily defended than our intelligence indicated, But there are opportunities for successful infiltration that weren't apparent from satellite imagery. She explained what she had observed about guard rotations, defensive positions, and security procedures. Then, she revealed her most important discovery, the service tunnel that could provide covert access to the facility. Rodriguez studied the photographs with growing interest. "You're certain about this tunnel?" Sarah nodded. "I observed personnel using it 3 times during my watch period. It appears to connect to a water treatment facility that serves both the compound and the village below. The facility is lightly guarded and located in an area where we could approach without detection." Morrison leaned forward, studying the intelligence Sarah had gathered. For the first time since she had met him, she could see genuine enthusiasm in his expression. "This changes everything," he said. "Instead of a frontal assault against a heavily defended position, we could infiltrate through the tunnel and achieve our objectives from inside the compound." Sarah was pleased that Morrison understood the implications of her discovery, but she also knew that successful infiltration would require careful coordination between her reconnaissance abilities and his team's tactical expertise. "Sir, I recommend a modified approach that combines infiltration with prepared direct action capabilities." Over the next 2 hours, Sarah and Morrison developed a plan that utilized the best elements of both their approaches. Sarah would lead a small team through the service tunnel to gather intelligence and identify high-value targets inside the compound. Morrison's remaining personnel would be positioned to provide support and execute direct action if the infiltration was compromised or if opportunities for rapid mission completion arose. The plan required precise timing and flawless communication, but it offered the best chance of achieving their objectives while minimizing risk to personnel and avoiding international complications. As they finalized the details, Sarah could see that Morrison's initial skepticism about her methods had been replaced by professional respect and genuine curiosity about how different approaches could complement each other. The mission would begin at nightfall, and success would depend on whether 2 very different military philosophies could work together effectively under pressure. The water treatment facility sat in darkness at 2,300 hours, its concrete structures barely visible against the rocky terrain. Sarah crouched behind a maintenance building with Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, both of them studying the area through night vision scopes. The intelligence she had gathered indicated that the facility was monitored by a single guard who made hourly rounds, but Sarah wanted to confirm the pattern before committing to their infiltration route. Rodriguez had volunteered to accompany Sarah through the service tunnel, despite obvious reservations about the unconventional approach. During their final planning session, he had admitted that he preferred direct action to what he called sneaking around in the dark, but he also acknowledged that Sarah's reconnaissance had revealed opportunities that conventional methods would have missed. "Guard just completed his rounds," Rodriguez whispered into his radio. "Moving to tunnel entrance now." Morrison's voice crackled back through their earpieces. "Copy. Overwatch positions are established. You have support if needed." Sarah led the way across the open ground between the maintenance building and the tunnel entrance. The service hatch was concealed behind overgrown vegetation, exactly as her observations had indicated. More importantly, there were no signs of electronic security measures or surveillance cameras that might detect their entry. The tunnel itself was larger than Sarah had expected, with enough space for them to move in a crouch without making excessive noise. The walls were concrete, and water pipes ran along both sides, providing both guidance for navigation and cover for any sounds they might make. Emergency lighting positioned every 50 meters created pools of dim illumination that allowed them to see without using their night vision equipment. As they moved through the tunnel, Sarah could hear Rodriguez breathing steadily behind her. She had been concerned about how the SEAL would adapt to the patient, methodical approach that infiltration required, but he was proving to be an excellent partner. His military training had prepared him for situations that required discipline and careful execution, even if they differed from his preferred methods. 15 minutes into their journey, Sarah held up her hand to signal a stop. Through the concrete walls, she could hear voices and movement that suggested they were approaching the compound. She motioned for Rodriguez to take position behind her while she examined the tunnel ahead more carefully. The service tunnel terminated at a maintenance room located in the basement of the compound's main building. Through a ventilation grate, Sarah could see the room was currently empty, but lights spilling from an adjacent corridor indicated that the area was occupied. She spent several minutes listening to determine patterns in the activity before signaling Rodriguez that it was safe to proceed. The maintenance room contained exactly what Sarah had hoped to find. Building plans posted on the wall that showed the complete layout of the facility. While Rodriguez monitored the corridor for approaching personnel, Sarah photographed the plans and began identifying the locations of high-value targets based on the intelligence briefings they had received. The trafficking organization's leadership was meeting in a conference room on the second floor, directly above their current position. The advanced military technology that was being offered for sale was stored in a vault located on the same level. Most importantly, the building's communication center was positioned in a way that would allow them to gather intelligence about the organization's entire network before taking any direct action. Sarah whispered these discoveries to Rodriguez, who relayed the information to Morrison's team through their communication system. For the first time since the mission had begun, Sarah could hear genuine excitement in Morrison's voice as he realized the possibilities that close infiltration had opened. Outstanding work. Morrison's voice crackled through their earpieces. Can you reach the communication center without detection? Sarah studied the building plans and considered the guard movements she had observed during her previous reconnaissance. Affirmative, but it will require patience and precise timing. Rodriguez looked at her with an expression she was learning to recognize. The SEAL was accustomed to missions where timing was measured in minutes or seconds, not the hours that Sarah's approach sometimes required. But he was also beginning to understand that her methods could achieve objectives that direct action alone might miss. They spent the next hour moving through the compound with extreme caution. Sarah led the way, using her knowledge of human behavior and building layouts to avoid detection. She had learned that most security personnel focused on external threats and obvious approach routes, leaving internal areas relatively unmonitored if infiltrators could reach them undetected. The communication center was protected by electronic locks and surveillance cameras, but Sarah had observed the security procedures during her earlier reconnaissance. She knew when the guards changed shifts, how long the corridors remained unmonitored, and which cameras had blind spots that could be exploited. As they approached their target, Rodriguez whispered, "How do you know all this will work?" Sarah paused before answering. She realized that Rodriguez was asking about more than just tactical procedures. He wanted to understand the philosophy behind her approach and why she was confident in methods that seemed to rely on patience and observation rather than overwhelming force. "Because I've learned that the most effective predators are the ones that understand their environment completely," she whispered back. "When you know how your target thinks, moves, and reacts, you can position yourself to succeed regardless of their strengths." Rodriguez considered this explanation as they waited for the guard change that would give them access to the communication center. Sarah could see him thinking through the implications of her approach and how it differed from the direct action methods he was accustomed to using. When the guards finally changed shifts, Sarah and Rodriguez had a 6-minute window to access the communication center, gather the intelligence they needed, and withdraw before the new security patrol arrived. For someone accustomed to Rodriguez's typical operations, 6 minutes would have seemed like an impossibly short time frame. But Sarah had learned that properly planned infiltration operations could accomplish remarkable results in very brief periods. The electronic locks yielded to equipment Sarah had brought specifically for this purpose. Inside the communication center, she found exactly what the mission briefing had indicated: detailed records of the trafficking organization's entire network, including contacts in government agencies, criminal organizations, and military units across 3 continents. While Rodriguez monitored the corridor outside, Sarah copied files that would allow intelligence agencies to dismantle the entire trafficking operation. She also identified the specific individuals who were involved in the technology transfer and the location where the transaction was scheduled to occur. As she worked, Sarah could hear radio communications that revealed something unexpected. The meeting that intelligence had indicated would occur over the weekend was actually happening tonight. The trafficking organization's leadership had moved up their schedule, apparently due to concerns about increased security in the region. This discovery changed everything. Instead of having 2 more days to plan and execute their mission, Sarah and Rodriguez needed to take action immediately to prevent the technology transfer from occurring. Sarah quickly transmitted this information to Morrison while considering their options. Morrison's response was immediate and decisive. Can you identify the meeting location and participants from your current position? Sarah studied the building plans and the intelligence she had gathered from the communication center. Affirmative. The meeting is occurring in the conference room 1 floor above us. I can identify 7 participants, including the organization's leadership and representatives from 3 different groups attempting to purchase the technology. Rodriguez moved closer to Sarah's position. What's our play? Sarah realized that this moment would determine whether the mission succeeded or failed. They had gathered valuable intelligence, but they still needed to prevent the technology transfer and capture or neutralize the trafficking organization's leadership. Doing so would require combining her infiltration capabilities with Rodriguez's direct action expertise. We have 2 options, Sarah explained quietly. We can withdraw and call in air strikes or a full assault, which would achieve our objectives, but might allow some targets to escape and would certainly alert other members of the network. Or we can neutralize the immediate threat ourselves and then extract with the evidence we've gathered. Rodriguez understood the implications immediately. 7 targets, 2 of us, in a building with 30 additional hostiles. Sarah nodded. But we have advantages they don't know about. We're already inside their security perimeter, we know the building layout, and they have no reason to expect an attack from inside the facility. She could see Rodriguez evaluating the tactical situation in the same way she had learned to assess hunting opportunities. The numbers were challenging, but the circumstances offered opportunities that direct assault could not provide. Morrison's voice interrupted their planning. Chun, Rodriguez, what's your assessment? Sarah keyed her radio. Sir, we can neutralize the primary targets and gather evidence that will allow follow-up operations against the entire network. But it will require immediate action and precise execution. There was a long pause before Morrison responded. Sarah could imagine him weighing the risks and benefits of allowing 2 personnel to attempt an operation that conventional wisdom would assign to a much larger force. Execute at your discretion, Morrison finally said. Overwatch is standing by to provide support. Sarah and Rodriguez spent 5 minutes planning their approach to the conference room. They would need to move quickly and decisively, using surprise and superior positioning to overcome the numerical disadvantage they faced. Most importantly, they would need to ensure that the advanced military technology was secured and that key personnel were captured rather than killed. The approach to the conference room required them to move through corridors that were periodically patrolled by security personnel. Sarah used the guard rotation schedules she had observed to time their movement perfectly. When they encountered personnel who could not be avoided, Rodriguez demonstrated why SEALs had earned their reputation for silent operations. Outside the conference room, Sarah and Rodriguez could hear voices discussing the details of the technology transfer. The trafficking organization's leadership was presenting information about the advanced weapons systems they had acquired, while potential buyers negotiated prices and delivery methods. Sarah positioned herself to monitor the corridor while Rodriguez prepared to breach the conference room door. They had agreed that speed and surprise would be essential for success, but they also needed to ensure that critical evidence was preserved and that key personnel survived for interrogation. Rodriguez signaled that he was ready, and Sarah confirmed that the corridor was clear of security patrols. On her signal, Rodriguez breached the door with explosive charges that stunned the occupants of the conference room without causing significant structural damage. What followed was a precisely executed operation that demonstrated the effectiveness of combining different tactical approaches. Sarah used her knowledge of human behavior and building layouts to control the situation and secure evidence, while Rodriguez applied his direct action training to neutralize threats and control personnel. Within 10 minutes, the trafficking organization's leadership was in custody, the advanced military technology was secured, and Sarah had gathered additional evidence that would allow intelligence agencies to dismantle the entire network. More importantly, They had prevented the technology transfer without alerting other members of the organization or creating international complications. As they prepared to extract from the compound through the same service tunnel they had used for infiltration, Rodriguez looked at Sarah with an expression of genuine respect. "I have to admit," he said, "your approach achieved results we couldn't have accomplished with conventional methods." Sarah smiled as she secured the evidence they had gathered. "And your direct action capabilities made it possible to capitalize on the opportunities that infiltration revealed. Neither approach would have succeeded alone." The extraction through the service tunnel proceeded without incident, and by dawn, Sarah and Rodriguez had rejoined Morrison's team at their forward operating base. The mission had been completed successfully, with objectives achieved and no personnel casualties. During the debriefing that followed, Morrison acknowledged that the combination of Sarah's reconnaissance and infiltration capabilities with his team's direct action expertise had created opportunities that neither approach could have achieved independently. The intelligence gathered during the operation led to coordinated raids across multiple countries that dismantled the entire trafficking network within 6 months. More importantly, the mission demonstrated that different tactical philosophies could complement each other when applied by personnel who understood and respected each other's capabilities. Sarah's patient, methodical approach had identified opportunities that conventional reconnaissance would have missed, while Rodriguez's direct action training had enabled them to capitalize on those opportunities decisively. 3 months later, Sarah received orders for a new assignment that would take her to Southeast Asia. As she prepared to leave the forward operating base, Morrison approached her with an unusual request. "Chun," he said, "I've been thinking about what we accomplished here. My team operates most effectively when we understand the environment and the opposition completely before taking action. Would you be interested in cross-training some of my personnel in your reconnaissance and infiltration methods?" Sarah realized that Morrison was offering something rare in the military: acknowledgement that different approaches could improve overall effectiveness, and a willingness to adapt proven methods to incorporate new capabilities. "I'd be honored to work with your team, sir," she replied. "But I'd also like to learn more about how direct action methods can be integrated with infiltration operations." Morrison smiled for the first time since she had met him. "I think that can be arranged. The brass has been asking questions about how we achieved the results we did on this mission. Apparently, there's interest in developing new approaches that combine different special operations capabilities." As Sarah boarded the transport aircraft that would take her to her next assignment, she reflected on what the mission had taught her about the value of different perspectives and approaches. She had learned that her individual capabilities were enhanced when combined with complementary skills, and that success often required adapting to circumstances rather than relying solely on established methods. The nickname Falcon had originally described her individual hunting style, but Sarah realized that the most successful predators were often those that could work effectively with others when the situation required it. Her reputation would continue to grow, not just because of her individual capabilities, but because she had learned to combine her unique skills with the abilities of others to achieve objectives that no single person could accomplish alone. 6 months later, Sarah received a message from Rodriguez indicating that the cross-training program Morrison had proposed was being implemented across multiple special operations units. The success of their mission had generated interest from the highest levels of military command in developing new approaches that combined patience with action, observation with execution, and individual excellence with team effectiveness. The message reminded Sarah that the most important victories were often those that changed how people thought about problems, not just those that achieved immediate objectives. By proving that different approaches could work together effectively, she had contributed to an evolution in special operations doctrine that would influence military training and operations for years to come. As she prepared for her next mission, Sarah understood that her role had expanded beyond individual operations to helping develop new capabilities that would serve her country's interests in an increasingly complex world. The lessons she had learned from watching birds of prey still guided her actions, but now those lessons were being shared with others who could apply them in their own unique ways. The name Falcon would continue to follow her, but now it represented not just individual excellence, but the ability to work with others to achieve results that exceeded what any single person could accomplish alone.